Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to see everybody here, especially Michael. Yes. Okay. Oh, you've got it. So this is my topic for today. I'm going to start with a very simple notion, which I hope everyone, even if they have an economics PhD, might accept, and that is that human feelings are fundamental. Of course, among those feelings, there might be feelings about how much I'm enjoying my life. And if I just draw a person randomly from the Brexit party, I have an example of extreme happiness. A week or two ago, I gave a talk in Brussels. I don't think Gus knows this, on the economics of well-being in the European Commission. An awful lot of people came. So perhaps I should broaden this, I thought, today to, are you ready for this? International happiness. If only. Of course, there are downs in life as well as ups. There are negative emotions, and nearly everything I'm going to say will be on markers of mental distress, generally of a kind I suppose a lot of you will not have seen before, although I'm going to start with some conventional happiness data to set the scene a little bit. The overarching question, the conceptual question that will hang over all of this is, how might we over the next 100 years weave together different kinds of well-being data for scientific reasons and also for the practical reason that we might get a better understanding of this obviously intrinsically multifaceted concept part of our overall sense of ourselves and how much we like life. I'm going to use throughout an example, so I hope to leave you with something substantive and narrow, and to use that as an illustration of a much broader set of issues. You will have to invite me back in 50 years when I'll be 115, will I? If you want to find out what the next half century will bring. But I'm going to start, as it were, on the conceptual issue by focusing on this example. Even as we sit here, ladies and gentlemen, can you face the fact that there's a graying of our temples just second by second as we sit here? There's a cycle of life. Now, what happens to human well-being as we age? I'm going to start with a material that's already known, although it may not be known to everybody in this room. This takes about 500,000, or a little bit under 500,000, UK observations, randomly sampled citizens from the ONS, and it plots age on the horizontal axis from about 16, which is really a bit young, but up to about 90. And this plots life satisfaction scores in a very simple ONS style. How satisfied are you overall with your life? There are many technical things I could talk about here, but I'm not going to. It doesn't seem the right venue. But you can see there's a kind of midlife low. And this has been replicated many, many times by different kinds of researchers. That was work with Blanchflower, Danny Blanchflower, my colleague, I should say. And this looks across quite recent data, 2016. This is across the 36 European nations, rather small data sets by modern standards, 36,000 observations. So we have more wiggles in the line, to put it highly technically, but you see the rough shape. And if you're unfamiliar with this scientifically, one of the really remarkable things is that the uncorrected estimates, that is the raw data, are almost the same shape as after you correct for a whole set of socioeconomic covariates. And that's, if you know anything about running regressions, that's a startling fact. If you're an American or keen on the United States, then you might want to know this work by Arthur Stone, Angus Deaton and co. This was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the USA. They use a Cantril score. I'm not going to tell you what that is today because it's not the day, but it's another measure of how people feel about how much they are liking their life. This, again, is about getting on for 500,000 people. Still just cross-sections, though we can replicate nearly all of this in longitudinal British data and so on. But we see this U shape and V shape again. And this is a large fall, although I won't explain exactly what I mean by that. That's not what I want to do today. That's just setting the scene. I'm going to present a lot of results that are not known, that are not in the public domain. These results are being refereed now. Say we wanted markers of human distress, and I suppose also the good stuff in human life, that were not of that kind. Say you didn't trust people's happiness answers, or you just wanted scientifically a different way to think about the whole problem. Here's an example. Forgive me, I have no way of knowing how many people know this shape, but at dinner parties I've discovered that even those with PhDs who think they know a lot about the world don't when it comes to this. A routine view is that it's the young people who have, in our society, who have a suicide problem. That's quite false. The peak risk of committing suicide, I'm afraid, is about age 45. I've cut off the data here at age 75 if the font is small at the back, and this is almost children. These are very young adults. My midlife suicide risk is about 2.5 times compared to teenagers. So despite what is believed, I suppose, by most vice-chancellors, it is not the young, it is not students who are at risk from suicide in comparison. It's the young professors and the older senior lecturers who are at risk from suicide. We can correct for cohort effects, because that's just a cross-sectional pattern, but I'm not going to go into the technical details of doing that today. Let me take you back to Macbeth. Sleep that knits up the ravelled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life, great nature's second course, balm of hurt minds, and so on. I'm afraid those sentences might be in the wrong order, but you get the idea. Macbeth knew, Lady Macbeth discovered, that sleeping problems are a marker of internal mental distress, and there's a huge literature, it's an interesting literature on this. I have no way of knowing how many of you know this, but very few social scientists do. Sleep hours follow a giant U shape through our lives. I don't even know whether Gus is aware of that. It's true for men and for women. If we break people down, this is about 500,000 people across 9 industrialized countries. If we break people down into groups, you see those with no children have more or less the same U shape as those with very young children, the employed, the high-skilled, the living in a couple. Even medical scientists barely know this. And this is quite against all health recommendations. This is different countries. Canada, Germany, the UK, the US, they have the same U shape in reported sleep hours through the life cycle. Different time periods. Maybe you think this is cohort effects. If we break it down into the 60s and the 70s, this is the 2000s. There's about 125,000 people in each of those quadrants. Of course, they're different people. Maybe you don't believe subjective reported sleep hours, and it might be sensible scientifically to worry about that. So let's go to objective sleep data. You probably don't know that thousands and thousands of people in our country are taken into hospital for sleep disorders. Now, I don't know how ill you have to be taken into hospital because you can't sleep, but of course, all I want you to see is that this is a fundamental problem, and there's a midlife peak in that. There's nothing subjective about this. This is people going off, I guess not in ambulances in general, but going off in a literal physical sense to British hospitals. Say we switch to the adult psychiatric morbidity survey. This is 2014. And I'm going to skip the technical details, but this is from a regression equation for I don't think my life is worth living. We have a midlife peak. This is another one for I have severe concentration and forgetfulness problems. I won't tell you how that's defined. It's done in a highly technical way. This is not just I forgot which bit of Warwick's car park I put the car in this morning. Again, we see a midlife peak. In case this is small font, that's 35 to 44 and 45 to 54, where the 2 high points are. This is alcohol dependence. This reminds me a little bit of the interesting work, the very important work by Case and Deaton. Although, of course, it was all done independently. It's not the same, but there's something a little bit reminiscent. This is very serious alcohol problems. It's defined in a technical way. If you know about this literature, this is a so-called audit score of more than 16, which is people who with very severe alcohol problems. Again, we have a midlife peak. And this is, I've been thinking about killing myself. This is suicide ideation in the APMS data set in Britain. The APMS is about 10,000 randomly sampled people. So we go to Australia, a very fine country. Where is Sasha Becker? A very fine country. One I lived in myself for 3 years when I was a boy, and I learned to play tennis and other useful things. Why do I care about that? Because as Redzo, my co-author, or a co-author on this knows, the Hilda survey has very interesting extreme job stress questions. I fear the amount of stress in my job will make me physically ill. So we bundle up a number of those, estimate fixed effects equations. That is, this is not just a cross-sectional pattern, this is following us through time as we age, through midlife and then older. So we switch to migraine scores. There's a fantastic, terribly interesting literature which I've had to read on migraine as a stress response. This is from the British Household Panel. I don't know how many observations, but a lot. This is just a cross-sectional pattern. Risk of disabling headaches reaches its peak in midlife, and this, we replicate this in the paper that's being reviewed or about to be reviewed in longitudinal data, so we get the same pattern in fixed effects equations. Let me just, before I start to wind down, remind you why this is really a striking paradox. If you look at the econometric estimates, people reach, on average in our society, their highest earnings around the age of 50. So these are the richest people. In general, at the age of 50, for us, I'm delighted to say we've had no illness. These are people living in the richest, safest, healthiest countries in the world. These countries are going through the richest, safest, and healthiest era in human history. So we have a fundamental scientific puzzle that is barely known by anyone and is currently unsolved. This has nothing to do with having young children, delightful though they are. It's found in lots of cross-country markers. If you take it seriously, I have a little hand in a paper with a talented psychologist at Edinburgh called Alex Weiss, with some primatologists in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the USA, showing that this is the U-shape in humans, and we show that this is the U-shape in 3 samples of other kinds of primates, 2 samples of chimpanzees and a sample of orangutans. This is the only paper of its kind in the world, so it will either be shown to be important or simply wrong. And I'm not looking forward to the email that tells me it's wrong, let's put it that way. What explains this? Even though we've had some of the best thinkers on this problem, no empirical progress has been made in understanding this. We just don't know what seems to drive this remarkable quadratic process inside us as humans. Let me draw to a close. Something fundamental. This is my, as it were, narrow substantive point I hope I might leave you with. Something fundamental is going wrong in the middle of people's lives in our kinds of astonishingly lucky countries, historically. There are now popular books by Jonathan Rauch, is a very clever journalist who works for Brookings and other organizations, and there's Setier's book, which is out, is also interesting. He's a philosopher and scientist at MIT. We see this pattern in all kinds of data, and the reason I've gone through this with you is because I think this is a marker of the future to come. I view this as a scientific puzzle. I suppose it probably will not be solved in my lifetime. What a solution would be is a convincing demonstration of why this pattern exists. But it'd be great if it was solved in my lifetime. This is the hump shape in hospital admissions for disorders, sleep disorders. This is, for males and females, the suicide pattern by age in the English-speaking nations. There's a whole authorship team behind a lot of all the new work that I presented, and I can't say too much about them, but Azia works in the economics department at Pittsburgh, Sally works at NatSen in London, Redzo is a young behavioral scientist in Warwick Business School. He wears a pink shirt on the stairway there. Nick Pautovi is a professor of behavioral science at WBS, and Ahmed is a very young researcher, a PhD student at Nuffield College in Oxford. He graduated from Warwick last year. The broader message for today is that, in my judgment, a lot of the next 100 years will be, and of course I don't know how the details will play out, ladies and gentlemen, will be about trying to understand the patterns of different kinds of well-being markers, covering very probably psychiatry and medicine and biology and economics and sociology and the rest, and how we blend them together. So for researchers, for everyone young in this room, I'm afraid I'm not in that group, though I hope to keep going quite a while. There's a lot to look forward to. I'll just say one thing as a PS. partly because it's come up. Some of the newest research, and I never thought in my life when I was an Oxford PhD student I'd ever be talking about feelings about income. We were not encouraged to think about feelings. As a PhD student at Nuffield College, Oxford, I can tell you that. Feelings about your income, I've come to realize, are extremely important, as I kind of implied to David. And some colleagues and I have a paper where we're arguing that a key predictor of who voted for Brexit was their disaffected, you might say, dissatisfied financial feelings. It's a twice as strong a predictor as your actual income. So it may look like Brexit was all about a political decision and how the world should be organized and immigrants and all sorts of things. But deep down, to a very considerable extent, Brexit was a cry of financial pain. And then, of course, if you ask people why they voted that way, then they have to give you some words. But I'm looking at the correlations in their feelings. I'm going to end where I began. Human feelings are absolutely fundamental, ladies and gentlemen, and as economists and others, I hope we might keep that at the center of our minds. Thank you.